All
Okay,
right,
very,
question
very good.
4.
Yeah, and since robocalling has to do with outbound dialing, which is what a lot of call centers do, and very often SIP trunks are used to serve these call centers. And one of the applications for a session border controller is to control that traffic from organizations such as call centers, contact centers, or anything that places outbound calls. So can you tell us how an SBC can be used to limit the traffic?
Yeah, and this is one of the little hidden applications for session border controllers that sometimes isn't initially considered as being quite so critical. Most folks think in terms of security and then maybe interoperability, but it turns out managing traffic is a lot more important sometimes. And the issue being, of course, as you mentioned, is flooding networks. There are issues in many networks with what's called a thundering herd, and this is when, if there's been a large power failure in an area, or some other situation where a lot of phones would come back up all at once in an enterprise application. For example, when the phones all come back up, they all immediately want to register, or people want to send calls immediately because there's been some natural disaster, hurricanes and earthquakes and these kinds of things. A flood of calls would come in, and the service provider has to limit them. A critical thing, and this is what the need is that they don't want just a hard number, say, all right, when we get to 10,000 calls per second, that's it, we stop, is to be able to intelligently limit the rate at which calls come in. And it's actually a session, interestingly enough, at that SIPNOC, Mark, that you and I attended, discussing back-off algorithms in some of the devices and other network architectures to be able to gracefully degrade performance when you get near the limit, as opposed to just hard stops, which is how a lot of the networks initially deployed. So a session border controller will generally have some intelligent speed limiting capabilities, and as a buyer, you should check into these things. Certainly, the maximum number of calls, you would want to be able to configure that. You would want to be able to configure the maximum number of calls per second, both inbound and outbound. And some of this is to protect against those denial of service attacks. Some is just to be able to manage traffic within the rest of the network. And then what do you do about the excess traffic? As I mentioned, one option is you just deny it. And of course, the problem with that is that probably the caller is going to immediately do a retry. And if it's a hard device, it'll immediately do a retry and just cause more problems. So one of the tricks is to use a congestion state, which is where, as the number of calls approaches your maximum, you start to respond slowly with responses to that call request, basically, queuing up requests at the front door so that you can slow the response by not immediately responding with a 405, but instead just slowing your responses to those messages. At the same time, too, there are network limits, right? There are limits based on network source or the origin of the call that you might want to cap. And then later, there might be at a higher limit, a hard limit, meaning, when we hit this highest number, that's it. We won't take any more calls. Then we just reject them. And again, by using these congestion algorithms, you can slow the responses. You can prevent retries that just exacerbate the problem by pounding on the session border controller on the network leg with retries.
Yeah, that's right. And you want to force the service level agreement that you've agreed to with your customer.
Correct.
But what comes up also very much in customer conversations, Alan, is that often customers are concerned about their soft switch or, the rest of their core network infrastructure, and they're concerned that it may be overloaded by these devices, these predictive dialers or other systems that now, the customers have access to. And so a session border controller is a good way to prevent the core network from being overwhelmed.
Yep, we've seen this at some customers too.
Thanks for listening. I hope you found this content useful. And don't forget to share this with any other your coworkers or others that might be interested. Also, don't forget to click on subscribe, and there's links below.